Today, I'm going to expose the psychological trick you've been using to sabotage your own life without even knowing it. You ever notice how some people will spend 45 minutes choosing what to watch on Netflix, but can't spend 5 minutes choosing what to do with their actual life? 45 minutes choosing what to watch on Netflix, but can't spend 5 minutes choosing what to do with their actual life. Yeah, you know exactly who I'm talking about. And if you don't, congratulations, it's probably you. See, while you're busy overthinking your Starbucks order or analyzing whether your co-worker's text sounds good, was passive-aggressive, or just typed by a normal human being who doesn't live inside your anxiety tornado, your brain is running ancient, pre-installed software that hasn't been updated since the Roman Empire. And that software? It's the reason you keep misunderstanding people, choosing the wrong friends, entering the wrong relationships, and generally acting like a confused NPC in the open world RPG of your own life. Because the truth is this: every single one of us is walking around with a psychological type, a built-in pattern that influences how we see the world, how we react to it, and how we screw things up inside it. And if you don't understand your type, congratulations. You're spending your entire life playing a character you don't even know how to control. Before we jump into the psychological jungle gym, that is your personality, we need to talk about a man named Gustav Jung. You know, the guy who basically cracked open the human mind like a pistachio and said, "Oh wow, look, there's a whole mythological ecosystem living in here." Born in 1875 in Switzerland, Jung was a psychiatrist who didn't just think outside the box. He questioned whether the box even existed in the first place. He worked with Freud, broke away from Freud, and then spent the rest of his life building a psychological framework so massive that people today are still arguing about what it means. His book, Psychological Types, the beast we're dissecting here, is one of the foundations of modern personality theory. It's the ancient DNA behind things like the Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, and all the BuzzFeed quizzes pretending to be psychological insight while asking you, which Disney princess are you when you're depressed? This book explores why people see the world so differently, why your friend thinks everything is a vibe, why your coworker irritates everyone by being logical, and why your parents think you're difficult when really you're just introverted and exhausted. But before we continue, here's the required statement for YouTube. Disclaimer: this video falls under the Fair Use Act. It's transformative, created for education purposes only, and not a replacement for the book. In fact, you absolutely should buy the book. Jung deserves your money more than whatever subscription service is currently draining your bank account. Now, listen, I'm not here to repeat the book. I'm here to drag it out of the 1920s, shake off the dust, shine a floodlight on its ideas, and confront you with the uncomfortable truth. Most of your problems aren't because life is unfair, they're because you don't understand your own mind or anyone else's. Jung's mission in this book was simple: explain why humans clash, misunderstand, argue, and psychologically body slam each other every day of their lives. He believed there are two main psychological attitudes: introversion, the energy moves inward; extroversion, the energy moves outward; and then four primary psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. Combine them and you get the building blocks of your personality, the original blueprint, your mental operating system. But here's where it gets wild. Jung didn't create this to label people like Pokemon. He created it to explain why human beings constantly fight and fail to understand each other, why the logical one thinks everyone else is dramatic, why the feeling one thinks everyone else is heartless, why the intuitives think they're psychic, and why the sensors think intuitives are delusional. This book is basically the psychological Rosetta Stone for figuring out why the entire world feels like a group project with people who absolutely should not be working together. And if you can stomach confronting your own flaws, your own biases, your own psychological defaults, then what Jung teaches you here will snap your worldview open like a glow stick at a rave. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. Opening the door to the invisible mind. Imagine this, you're standing in your kitchen, staring blankly at the open fridge, scrolling on your phone again, and you swear you won't eat the leftover pizza. But 5 minutes later, you're tearing into it like the leftovers owe you money. Why? Because the part of you that makes the decision is slow. The part of you that acts already signed the deal without asking. That unseen operator behind your choices, the backstage crew of your psyche, is running the show, and you're just the actor handed the script. Let's throw open that curtain and shine a spotlight on what's been quietly hijacking your identity. In this foundational piece, we dive into how your unconscious self, yes, the one you pretend isn't there, has been pulling the strings. The book in question sets us on this journey. We discover that the you who thinks you're steering is actually in the passenger seat while your hidden self drives. Before we go full throttle, a quick word. This is educational commentary under the Fair Use Act. Whatever you hear here distills and interprets the ideas. It's not a substitute for buying and engaging with the original text. Do yourself the favor and grab the book. Here's the deal. Jung argues that long before you decided who you are, an invisible architecture of psyche was already in place, pre-wired, shaped by myths, symbols, instincts, and attitudes. Think of it like the firmware of your mind. You booted it. Now it runs in the background like a ghost operating system. This piece of the book takes us through how your hidden self is structured, how it influences your perception of people and the world, and how you can start recognizing it so you stop living on autopilot. We learn that the conscious self, the one you identify with, the one saying, I want, I choose, I decide, is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath lies a vast layer of unconscious patterns. Your preferences, biases, instincts, emotional charges, they're operating out of sight. The book introduces the idea that one's type, attitude plus function, determines and limits one's judgment from the get-go. So you walk into this world with a biased lens, not a neutral eye. Here's where I start calling you out. If you think you're objective and seeing things as they are, you're lying to yourself, because your psychological type has already filtered that world before your conscious mind even blinked. That filter decides what you notice, how you interpret it, how you react. The book lays this foundation. Attitudes like extroversion and introversion, functions like thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. You probably know the Myers-Briggs letters floating around, that's derivative. This original work digs into the machinery behind them. In this opening segment, we're shown how the hidden mind shapes your life experiences. Real life example. Imagine two colleagues are given the same project. One jumps into the spreadsheets, focuses purely on numbers and structure. The other walks into the break room, senses the group vibe, reads the mood, intuitively skims the upcoming changes. They disagree, they clash, partly because they're operating from different psychological wires. Jung would say that invisible wiring is what we need to map if we ever want to stop fighting ourselves and each other. Another example, Economics News Today says inflation rose this week in the US, wages lag behind, people feel frustrated and powerless. That frustration, it isn't just external. Internally, you might have a function, say intuition, screaming, everything's shifting, crisis looming, pattern here, while another part, sensation, is grounded in everyday reality. But hey, I still paid rent and bought groceries. That tension plays out in debates, in anxiety, in voting, in how you respond to change. The invisible self is always reacting before you think you are. The book critiques modern life too. We have superficial self-images, masks, personas we show publicly, but behind that is the deeper self that craves wholeness, meaning, integration. The author says your type, whether you're introverted or extroverted, rational or irrational, comes with shadows, inferior functions, parts of you avoid. These parts don't stay hidden, they leak into your behavior, your dreams, your fights. If you don't recognize them, you become hostage to reactive patterns. Here's a key idea. The hidden self is not your enemy, it's the foundation. Your work is to wake it up, negotiate with it, stop ignoring it, because when you ignore it, it controls you. When you integrate it, you gain mastery. The commentary I add: in a world where quick personality tests dominate apps and dating profiles, this book asks for depth. It demands you look beyond "I'm an ENFP" and instead ask, why am I an ENFP? What parts still run unexamined? The chapter closes by inviting you into a journey of self-discovery that is not gentle. It says, if you keep denying the invisible mind, you'll keep banging into the same problems, the same mistakes, the same gut reactions. If you decide to open the door, you'll see. You're not just living your life, you're fulfilling it. You're not just reacting, you're responding. Key idea: your psychological type is the hidden wiring of your mind. It shapes your perception, your decisions, and your relationships before your conscious self even gets to speak. Key takeaway: recognizing your hidden type gives you power. You stop being a passive actor in your life and start becoming a conscious director. Favorite quote: in attempting to answer this question, I came across the problem of types. For it is one's psychological type which from the outset determines and limits a person's judgment. Ancient minds, eternal patterns. By the time you get halfway through this next chapter, you'll start noticing something uncomfortable. Humans have been arguing about the same psychological crap for over 2,000 years. We think we invented personality types on TikTok last week. But the ancient world was already wrestling with the exact same mental patterns while wearing sandals and staring at the stars instead of doom-scrolling Twitter. The book shows us how the earliest thinkers tried to make sense of why people think differently, and the first thing we learn is this: nobody has ever agreed on anything, not then, not now. Today, America is arguing over inflation, recession fears, and who's responsible. But back in the classical age, they were arguing about the shape of reality itself. And believe it or not, those arguments formed the blueprint for what we now call psychological types. Take the Greeks. They weren't just sitting around carving statues. They were dissecting the way humans perceive truth. One group insisted reality is grasped through abstraction, ideals, the realm of perfect forms. The other said reality is what hits your senses, what you can touch, taste, hear, and measure. Sound familiar? It's the same fight today between data-obsessed analysts and the intuition-heavy pattern recognizers who swear their gut is a more accurate instrument than a spreadsheet. Back then, it was Plato versus Aristotle. Today, it's economists versus influencers, rationalists versus spiritualists, and your uncle who thinks inflation is caused by vibes rather than monetary policy. The book then drags us into early Christian debates, which weren't just theological, they were psychological battlegrounds. People weren't arguing about God, they were arguing about how people know anything. Every disagreement about doctrine was secretly a disagreement about perception. The transubstantiation argument, whether bread literally becomes body, wasn't just a church fight, it was a type fight. One side demanded symbolic interpretation, the other insisted on literal reality. This is the exact same split you see today between people who read meaning into everything and people who mock them for overthinking. And then we hit nominalism versus realism. This wasn't dusty medieval philosophy. It was an X-ray of how different minds process categories. Are universals real, or are they just names? A realist says, human nature exists. A nominalist says, no, we invented that idea. Replace universals with gender, identity, personality, or truth, and welcome to the modern American news cycle. Everything we argue about now is just this same ancient debate dressed in 21st century clothing. The book shows how psychological types were slowly being discovered before psychology even existed. People notice patterns. Some thinkers are concrete, some abstract. Some want precision, some chase meaning. Some cling to the literal, others to the symbolic. These weren't just intellectual differences, these were psychological attitudes, the prototypes of the functions Jung would later define. Then comes the Luther versus Zwingli fight, two men reading the same scripture but seeing different universes. Luther insisted the bread is Christ's body because the words say so. Zwingli insisted the words are symbolic. And there it is again, sensation versus intuition, concrete versus conceptual. Neither man was arguing religion. They were arguing type, same text, different minds, different worlds. Here's where the commentary punches you in the face. These ancient arguments are still determining your relationships, your politics, your conflicts at work, the way you make decisions, and most importantly, the way you fight with your partner. When one person needs literal clarity and the other leaves in metaphor, every conversation is a battlefield. The modern world is drowning in the same debates recycled endlessly. Rationalists yelling at idealists, realists mocking dreamers, concrete thinkers rolling their eyes at symbolic ones, and none of it is new. These patterns are ancient, eternal. What this part of the book makes brutally clear is that humans don't just disagree because they're stubborn, they disagree because they're different types. Their minds are wired to see reality differently. And until you understand that, you'll spend your life in pointless arguments trying to convert someone who literally cannot perceive the world the way you do. Key idea: the earliest philosophical and theological battles weren't about doctrines. They were about psychological type differences expressed as arguments about reality. Key takeaway: if you don't understand that people perceive the world through fundamentally different mental lenses, you will get trapped in the same ancient circular arguments humanity has been recycling since Greece. Favorite quote: almost every conceivable kind of mind found its advocate and representative in the centuries-long struggle, but all the arguments and all the standpoints lead back in the end to certain basic oppositions. The two forces inside you. You probably think your instincts and your ideals are just two sides of the same coin, but the truth, they're more like two rival kingdoms locked in a civil war inside your head, and Schiller drew their battle lines centuries ago. Jung drags Schiller's ideas into the light, because if you don't get how these forces fight in you, you'll keep sabotaging your own potential. Schiller, in his Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man, splits psychological life into what he calls superior and inferior functions. Jung latches onto this because it basically maps out how people feel smarter or weaker, how they lean on their strengths or unconsciously rely on parts of themselves they don't even respect. Schiller believed you could train these functions through aesthetic education, by wrestling with beauty, by refining how you feel, think, perceive. He's not talking about art for art's sake. He's talking about using culture, poetry, and beauty to build a more integrated self. Jung sees that as a blueprint for how our conscious ego and unconscious can stop being enemies. Then Schiller draws a second battlefield: naive versus sentimental poets. And don't mistake poets for some sappy artists in a coffee shop. Schiller means mindsets. The naive attitude is raw, direct, almost primal. You identify with nature, you let it move through you. Schiller said the naive poet is nature, letting reality speak without filtering. As Jung interprets it, that's like living in a state where sensation is king. You trust what you can touch, feel, experience, and you don't overthink it. It's a deeply extroverted way of being because you submit to the outside world. The object, nature, reality, shapes you. You are the object. But then we have the sentimental attitude. This mindset doesn't just accept nature, it reflects on it. It's the thinker, the one with an inner monologue, always questioning, Always idealizing, Schiller describes how the sentimental person looks at an object but immediately relates it to an idea, a concept, a longing, something beyond just what's in front of them. That reflection is rooted not in sensation, but in intuition, according to later Jungian mapping. The sentimental person is distant. They don't just become nature, they shape it, judge it, dream it. They are more introverted in that their inner world is constantly evaluating the outer world. But here comes the kicker. Schiller doesn't just want us to pick sides. He warns that both attitudes are limited. The naive, though pure, can become shallow and lost if they're only responsive. The sentimental, though deep, can become disconnected from reality, lost in idealism and speculation. In his ideal vision, neither is enough on its own. He imagines a third horizon, the ideal, where these forces unite. Schiller argues that true human harmony comes when the spontaneous natural energy and reflective ideal energy merge. He doesn't suggest a bland compromise, he wants a synthesis. Jung takes this and runs with it. He says this is exactly why people develop inferior functions. We lean on what feels safe, our superior function, the one we identify with, but the shadow function, the one we repress, is essentially the other force, screaming to be integrated. If you ignore it, it doesn't stay quiet. It grows, and eventually it acts out. The naive person who never reflects becomes emotionally stunted. The sentimental person who never grounds becomes psychologically unstable. Here's where it gets modern and brutal. Your inner war between instinct and ideal isn't just poetic. It shapes how you decide what job to take, what relationship to build, what kind of life you think you deserve. For example, people in today's gig economy are often deeply sentimental. They dream big, idealize their future, reflect on purpose, but without grounding sensation, they burn out chasing unicorns. Others lean into naive mode. They just hustle, feel, react to external stimuli, but don't reflect on why they work or to what end, and they end up bitter or empty. Research backs this up. Modern psychology shows that people who are too future-oriented, intuition plus idealism, often struggle with anxiety because they live in potentials and fears. On the other hand, those who are too rooted in what's tangible, sensation only, can miss meaning, creativity, long-term satisfaction. Studies on decision-making show that integrating both gives the best results. Grounded intuition plus reflective sensation leads to more balanced, fulfilling choices. For instance, behavioral economists talk about System 1 versus System 2 thinking. That's your naive and sentimental battling in real time. And culturally, think about how social media amplifies this war. The naive mindset says, just respond, react, feel, while the sentimental mindset says, pause, reflect, project meaning. Platforms reward both, the raw emotional post and the deeply thoughtful essay, but very few people live in a place where they actively integrate both. That gap is exactly what Jung, via Schiller, is warning us about. Key idea. Inside you are two rival empires, one ruled by unfiltered instinct, the other by idealized reflection, and both are essential, but neither is enough alone. Key takeaway. The path to psychological maturity isn't choosing either instinct or idealism. It's learning to let both speak and building a self that integrates them. Your growth becomes not just reaction or reflection, but wise synthesis. Favorite quote: the naive Einstellung is extroverted because the object has primacy, whereas the sentimental Einstellung is introverted because the subject reflects upon the object. Light and chaos, the Apollonian versus the Dionysian within. It's wild how people love pretending they're complex, like they're some mysterious enigma made of 14 layers of trauma and matcha lattes, when in reality, most of us are just repeating the same two ancient human patterns over and over. the part of you that wants order, clarity, control, and the part that wants chaos, emotion, ecstasy, meltdown, rebirth. Jung takes this straight from the Greeks, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, but he doesn't leave them in mythology. He rips them open and shows you they're the actual gears grinding behind your personality. On one side, you have Apollo, the god of light, rationality, form. That's the part of you that makes lists, tries to act like an adult, decides to fix your sleep schedule every Monday. The Apollonian force wants distance, structure, self-control. It demands boundaries. Jung uses this to show a psychological attitude that leans toward clarity, abstraction, restraint. It's what makes you believe you can out-organize your feelings by buying a new planner. It's the same mental energy behind the stock market analysts trying to bring order to an economy spiraling from inflation, spikes, layoffs, and political chaos. Their spreadsheets are Apollonian talismans, weapons against uncertainty. Then there's Dionysus, god of wine, frenzy, wildness, destruction and renewal, the part of you that self-sabotages at 2 a.m., the part that cries during commercials, the part that wants to run into the ocean instead of answering emails. Jung explains that the Dionysian attitude is about immersion, intensity, dissolution of boundaries. It's emotional truth over rational clarity. It's the psychological state where you stop analyzing and start feeling sometimes too much. Jung draws from Nietzsche here, but he goes deeper. He says these aren't just artistic modes. They reveal core psychological functions. The Apollonian mind splits the world into clear objects. The Dionysian dissolves them into unified emotional fields. One says, be precise. The other says, be alive. And the tension between them? That's the tension your whole personality rides on. But here's where the commentary cuts the nerve. Modern life has shoved you into one side while starving the other. Most people today are Apollonian on the surface, polished LinkedIn profiles, aesthetic Notion pages, and an obsession with optimizing productivity. You think you're choosing clarity, but really you're terrified of your own unpredictability. Meanwhile, your Dionysian self builds pressure underground like a psychological volcano until one random Wednesday, you're crying on your lunch break in a Target parking lot. Psychologists see this constantly. People avoid one side of themselves until it mutates into a shadow. Neuroscience even backs Jung's intuition. Studies on cognitive control versus emotional processing show that repressing emotion doesn't eliminate it, it amplifies it, recruiting deeper limbic pathways. Jung was basically warning us, if Apollo dominates too long, Dionysus comes back twice as strong, and usually uninvited. He ties this to creativity too. Apollonian form without Dionysian vitality becomes sterile. Think of AI-generated music that sounds mathematically perfect, but has the soul of a tax return. Dionysian energy without Apollonian structure becomes chaos. A TikTok feed where everyone is melting down for engagement. The Greeks thought you needed both to make art. Jung says you need both to make yourself. And here's the unflinching truth most people don't want to hear. Your life problems aren't random. They're symptoms of which God you serve too much. If you keep clinging to order, you suffocate. If you keep chasing chaos, you disintegrate. Jung's genius is showing that these aren't choices. They're psychological currents inside you, and your growth depends on learning how not to drown in either one. Key idea. Two ancient psychological forces, order and chaos, shape how you think, feel, create, and destroy. You need both, but you fear one. Key takeaway. Your personality becomes whole only when you stop over-identifying with the light or the wild, and instead learn how to negotiate with both integration beats repression, every time. Favorite quote: The Apollinian attitude is a restraint of the primitive instincts, whereas the Dionysian is a breakthrough of those same instincts. Who you become under pressure. When life is calm, everyone thinks they're a good person. It's only when the pressure hits, when a bill arrives you can't pay, or when your partner finally says, "We need to talk," that your real psychological operating system boots up. The version of you that shows up under stress isn't the curated one from your Instagram feed. It's the raw, unfiltered blueprint Jung spends this entire section ripping open like a bad drywall repair. And it's the same blueprint you try to hide behind productivity hacks and inspirational quotes you'll forget by next Tuesday. Jordan's old classification system paints personality not as some cute MBTI label, but as a tension between affect and action. Those who feel deeply and react slowly, and those who feel lightly but act quickly. And honestly, it's hilarious how accurately this maps onto modern America. You've got the thinking they're the main character crowd who crumble the second someone corrects them, and then you've got the impulsive hit send before proofreading types who create disasters out of boredom. Jung uses these categories to show that your behavior under pressure isn't random. It's a predictable pattern your unconscious has been rehearsing for decades. Take the introverted woman from the book. Jung describes her as more impassioned, not in the romantic Pinterest quote way, but in the depth over breadth sense. Her emotional life is volcanic, slow-moving, and terrifying when stirred. Today she'd be the person who quietly stews for 6 months, then writes a 14-paragraph text message at 3 a.m. that starts with, "It's funny how..." Jung notes that this type often appears detached from the external world because her inner one is screaming louder. Psychology research today supports this. Introverts in stress conditions activate deeper limbic processing, meaning they feel more before they act. That's why they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because the cost of reacting is enormous. Now compare that to the extroverted woman Jung calls less impassioned. He doesn't mean shallow, he means her emotional system is calibrated for speed, not depth. She adapts, pivots, socializes her way out of stress. She's the one rallying people during a crisis, often holding everyone together until she collapses later in the shower, defeated by the single hair care commercial that pushes her over the emotional edge. These are the people who look functional until one day they ghost the entire planet for 6 months. Modern research calls this social overregulation. You keep managing others until your own system short circuits. The extroverted man in Jung's description is almost painfully modern. He's outward driven, motivated by results, quick to commit, and even quicker to justify whatever he's committed to. He's your friend who buys crypto at the peak, loses everything during a Federal Reserve interest rate announcement, and still insists he's early to the next wave. This type survives stress by externalizing it, projecting it outward, fixing things, working harder, filling his calendar. If he's drowning, you won't know until he's already underwater. Then there's the introverted man, Jung's most complex portrait of the group withdrawn, highly sensitive to internal impressions, frequently misunderstood. This is the guy who gets accused of being arrogant because he mentally rehearses responses instead of improvising them. Under pressure, his defenses go up, his inner world tightens, and his outer world becomes almost unbearable. Today we call this high-intensity cognitive processing under threat, which is a fancy way of saying he thinks himself into misery, but Jung is careful. This type isn't weak, he's just not built for chaos. When systems break, like the US housing market showing cracks again as household debt hits historic highs, this type becomes prophetic. His pattern recognition goes through the roof, and suddenly he's the only one who can map the future because he's actually been paying attention. What ties all of this together is the uncomfortable idea that stress reveals your core type because stress strips away every compensatory behavior you've layered on top of it. You might pretend to be chill, assertive, social, independent, logical, But when pressure shows up, your unconscious chooses for you. Jung's argument here is brutal but true. You're not the person you claim to be. You're the person you become when your coping mechanisms stop working. And if that stings, good. That means there's still hope. Because once you see your stress self clearly, you finally have a chance to grow past it instead of letting it keep sabotaging your relationships, your career, and your sense of identity. Key idea: your true type appears only under stress. The moment your conscious persona collapses and your unconscious patterns take the wheel. Key takeaway: stop defining yourself by who you are on good days. The version of you that shows up under pressure is the one steering your life. Understand that person, and you stop being controlled by unconscious instincts that have been ruining your choices for years. Favorite quote: impulsion and emotion are autonomous. They obey no conscious law. The symbol that saves you. The funny thing about people is that everyone swears they're thinking for themselves until you ask them why they panic scroll TikTok every night like a lab rat waiting for a pellet. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us don't run on thoughts. We run on symbols, stories, images, archetypes that tell us who we are long before we consciously approve the script. You think you like superhero movies because they're fun? No. You like them because you desperately want someone to save you from the chaos you keep creating. Jung's exploration of Spitler and Goethe exposes that exact truth. These writers didn't just craft stories, they built psychological ecosystems, maps showing how the unconscious sneaks around your defenses. Goethe embodies a consciousness that works with nature, harmonizing its contradictions, while Spitler dramatizes the collision between ego and mythic forces. Jung uses them as living case studies of how symbolic imagination operates, not as entertainment, but as the software architecture of the psyche. Goethe's symbolic world is rooted in an organic unity. In his works, symbols aren't decorations, they're structural beams of the human mind. Meanwhile, Spitler lets the symbolic world erupt like a psychological earthquake, the unconscious rebelling against an ego that mistakenly thinks it's in charge. Jung zooms in on these differences not because he's doing literary criticism, but because he wants you to understand this. The symbols you respond to reveal which inner forces dominate you. Corporate America already knows this better than you do. That's why your bank advertises itself with eagles, strong hands, mountains, and golden beams of sunlight. They're not selling banking, they're selling a myth where you feel protected, elevated, heroic. Meanwhile, the news cycles oscillate between apocalyptic doom and moral crusade because fear and righteousness are the fastest path to total psychological possession. These are modern versions of the same symbolic mechanisms Goethe and Spitler used, just more weaponized, more addictive, and all aimed straight at your amygdala. Jung's idea of the uniting symbol hits hardest here. When your inner life is tearing itself apart, your impulses versus your ideals, your reason versus your instincts, symbols step in as mediators. They don't explain, they bridge. They give form to what your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. That's why humans project their inner contradictions onto gods, myths, heroes, villains, political parties, celebrities, even zodiac signs. When you split psychologically, the symbol becomes the glue. And you don't get to avoid this. You already worship something, even if it's your own anxiety. But here's the twist. Jung adds, symbols aren't absolute. Their meaning shifts depending on the inner state of the person experiencing them. That's what the symbol relativity sections drive home. A serpent can be wisdom, temptation, healing, or destruction depending on the psyche interpreting it, which basically means your unconscious takes the same images we all see and customizes them into your personal operating system. This is why two people can watch the same movie and walk away with entirely different revelations, and why one person reads The Lord of the Rings as a heroic journey, while another sees it as an existential breakdown with swords. It also explains why half of America interprets political events as the rise of a savior, and the other half sees them as the apocalypse. Same events, same symbols, different psychic filters. Modern research backs this up everywhere. Narrative psychology, cognitive linguistics, media studies, all confirm what Jung laid out decades earlier. Humans don't think in logic, they think in story-structured symbolic containers. Even therapists today know that healing happens not by giving better advice, but by helping someone rewrite the symbolic narrative they're trapped in. If you're drawn to a specific myth, a specific character, a specific story, it's not random. It's your unconscious waving a flare, saying, "This is the map, follow this." And most people ignore it because it doesn't come in a PowerPoint. This entire section of Jung's book shows that symbols aren't aesthetic details or spiritual fluff. They're psychological survival tools. They reveal what you lack, what you fear, and what you secretly hope to become. They unify when you're divided, break you open when you're too rigid, and expose you when you're lying to yourself. The real problem is that most people today treat symbols like memes, consuming them mindlessly, never noticing they're swallowing psychological instructions with every scroll. Your unconscious is starving for meaning, but you keep feeding it junk imagery. Then you wonder why you feel empty. Key idea: symbols aren't decorative. They are the unconscious mind's operating language, shaping, revealing, and balancing inner conflicts long before you ever notice them consciously. Key takeaway: if you want to understand yourself, don't analyze your thoughts. Analyze the stories, images, myths, and characters you're magnetically drawn to. They reveal your psychological blueprint more accurately than your self-declared personality ever will. Favorite quote: in Spitala's work, the poet's struggle with his own gods becomes the drama of a soul that would master its symbols only to be mastered by them. When the mind breaks the rules. There's a moment in everyone's life when the mind stops pretending it has everything under control, and it usually happens at the worst possible time. In traffic, in a grocery store, during a breakup, or in the middle of a work meeting when your boss asks a question so stupid your entire nervous system files for resignation. These moments expose you, not the Instagram version of you, not the I'm healing version, but the version your unconscious has been hiding behind a psychological paywall for years. And when that wall finally cracks, your type doesn't just reveal itself, it overruns the place like a toddler at a Target toy aisle. That's the whole point Jung makes when he examines psychological types through psychopathology. Mental disorder doesn't invent new traits, it magnifies the ones already there. The breakdown is never random. It's your dominant function, the one you've worshipped like a personal religion, going rogue and devouring everything else. Otto Gross called this the tyranny of the primary function, the part of your psyche that becomes a dictator the moment stress overwhelms your inner checks and balances. We see this everywhere today. People don't suddenly become paranoid, obsessive, impulsive, or emotionally volatile. Those tendencies were already living in their psychological basement. They just finally got access to the Wi-Fi. This is why someone who spends years preaching logic and rationality becomes the most unhinged conspiracy theorist the moment life punches them in the face. Their thinking function wasn't strength, it was overcompensation. And when it collapses, the repressed irrationality erupts like a chemical spill. Jung shows that neurosis often comes from psychological one-sidedness, being so loyal to one mode of functioning that the others mutate in the shadows. A person who is obsessed with feelings becomes overwhelmed by them. A person who worships logic becomes trapped in sterile half-thoughts that never reach reality. A person who relies on intuition becomes lost in prophetic fantasies with no grounding. A person addicted to sensation becomes a hostage of impulses they can't regulate. Madness isn't chaos, it's imbalance under a microscope, and society today is a petri dish of imbalance. Look at the current mental health crisis in the US. Rising anxiety rates, record-breaking antidepressant prescriptions, burnout so severe the Surgeon General is begging companies to stop treating workers like replaceable cogs. These aren't signs of a sick society alone. They're signs of millions of people whose types are cracking under environments they were never designed for. When the economy destabilizes, when rent inflates faster than wages, when your job productivity metrics read like a dystopian fitness tracker for your soul, your psyche stops playing nice, and suddenly you're face to face with your unfiltered psychological machinery. What Jung reveals is brutally simple. Psychological breakdowns follow predictable patterns because psychological types follow predictable structures. The extroverted thinker under stress becomes rigid, moralistic, controlling, the kind of person who corrects everyone's grammar while their own life burns down. The introverted intuitive becomes prophetic and paranoid at the same time, connecting dots that shouldn't be connected but doing so with terrifying conviction. The feeling types spiral into emotional storms, while the sensation types drown in compulsions. These aren't flaws. They're the exact same traits that help you survive when you're stable. But once they lose balance, they stop being functions and start being tyrants. Even modern psychological research confirms this. Neuroscience shows that under chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex dims and the limbic system hijacks decision-making. Translation: your conscious type loses the wheel and your unconscious type floors the gas, which means your shadow function, the part of you swear you don't have, is actually the one driving you during your worst moments. Think of every meltdown, compulsive decision, self-destructive habit, and midnight crisis you've ever had. That wasn't you losing control. That was you revealing the control you never had. This is why understanding your type in its pathological form is more important than understanding it in its healthy form. You don't ruin your life when you're calm. You ruin it when your psyche gets tired of negotiating with you. Jung's entire point in this section is that psychological disorder isn't foreign, it's familiar. It's your type, stripped of all the polite filters you use to make yourself socially acceptable. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Because until you learn how your mind breaks, you'll never learn how to keep it whole. Key idea: breakdowns don't create new personalities. They expose the underlying type by removing the restraints that kept it balanced. Key takeaway: if you want real psychological strength, don't study who you are when you're stable. Study who you become when your dominant function mutates under pressure. That version of you is the one capable of destroying your life or rebuilding it. Favorite quote: the primary function is intensified to the point where the secondary functions collapse or perish altogether. Beauty, meaning, and the shape of your soul. Some people look at a painting and feel absolutely nothing. They stand in front of a masterpiece, something that took a genius years to complete, and they stare the same way they stare at a broken vending machine. Bored, impatient, mildly inconvenienced. And then they have the audacity to assume the art is the problem, not their own psychological flatline. This is why Jung drags us into the world of aesthetics, not because he wants you to become an art critic, but because beauty exposes the hidden architecture of your soul. It shows what your psyche responds to, what it rejects, what it fears, and what it secretly worships. And that's exactly why some people hate poetry, avoid museums, can't tolerate metaphors, and think symbolism is too complicated. Their ego doesn't want witnesses. It doesn't want mirrors. It doesn't want to see what's been leaking through the cracks of their personality for decades. This is the brilliant point Jung makes in this section. He shows that every psychological type has a different relationship to beauty. It's not random. It's not cultural. It's the unconscious blueprint revealing itself through preference. The thinking-dominated individual seeks clarity, rational structure, order. The feeling type responds to value, harmony, emotional significance. The sensation type loves the concrete, the sensory richness, the tangible, and the intuitive. They chase possibilities, symbols, future meanings, the invisible scaffolding beneath the artwork itself. Jung demonstrates that aesthetic response is psychological type in its purest, least edited form. Art reveals what you lack, what you're avoiding, or what you're suppressing. That's why some people rage against abstract art. It exposes their terror of ambiguity. Or why others hate hyperrealism. It confronts their refusal to live in the present. Meanwhile, the US economy is collapsing under the weight of overstimulation, endless ads, endless content, endless imagery, and still, people complain of feeling empty. That's what happens when your psyche consumes visual junk food every day. You're drowning in images, but starving for meaning. Modern research backs Jung completely. Neurology shows that aesthetic experience lights up both emotion and cognition, the psyche's two biggest operating systems, creating an internal conversation between what you notice and what you feel. Narrative psychology shows that the stories you gravitate toward predict your internal conflicts. Even behavioral economics uses aesthetics to track decision patterns. Your taste in beauty is a psychological fingerprint. Jung points out that art doesn't just reflect the psyche, it shapes it. That's why every major civilization has expressed its worldview through aesthetics, temples, sculptures, myths, symbols. When a culture becomes shallow, its aesthetics collapse. When a person becomes shallow, their taste collapses. And here we are, a society that worships algorithms over meaning, convenience over depth, spectacle over symbolism. This is why Jung's analysis feels so brutally relevant today. He describes how aesthetic judgment becomes psychological revelation, how the type you are determines the beauty you recognize. He even warns that when a person's type becomes too one-sided, their aesthetic sense becomes warped. They either overvalue art as a substitute for living, or undervalue it because they can't tolerate reflection. Both extremes are a sign of psychic imbalance, and look around. Extreme reactions dominate everything. Half the country has replaced critical thinking with fandom, while the other half has replaced emotional intelligence with cynicism. The truth is simple. Beauty is a diagnostic. If you can't appreciate it, you're not protecting your sophistication, you're exposing your psychological damage. This entire section shows that aesthetics isn't optional. It's the bridge between the rational and irrational, the conscious and unconscious, the individual and the collective. Beauty isn't decoration. It's the face your psyche wears when you're not paying attention. And if you're willing to look at what you find beautiful and what you find ugly, you'll finally understand the shape of the soul you've been carrying around without ever examining. Key idea: your response to beauty isn't a matter of taste, it's a revelation of type. Aesthetic judgment exposes the structure, balance, and hidden conflicts of your psyche more honestly than your behavior ever will. Key takeaway: if you want to know who you are beneath your defenses, don't analyze your personality. Analyze the art, stories, symbols, and images that move you or repel you. Aesthetics is the mirror your unconscious uses when you refuse to look directly at yourself. Favorite quote: aesthetic judgment rests upon the whole man, and the whole man is revealed in it. The great psychological oppositions. The reason most people are confused about themselves isn't because they lack self-awareness, discipline, therapy, or a morning routine soaked in motivational nonsense. It's because their minds are built on contradictions they've never learned to identify, let alone manage. And nothing exposes these contradictions faster than polarities, those psychological tug-of-wars that live in the basement of your personality and occasionally sprint upstairs to set your entire life on fire. Jung knew this, but before him, William James tried to map the battlefield, and James, bless his philosophical optimism, believed people came in two main flavors, the tough-minded and the tender-minded. One clings to facts like their life rafts, the other clings to ideals like their prophecy. The problem? Real human beings aren't two buttons on a vending machine. If anything, we're the entire broken vending machine. buzzing, sparking, refusing coins, and occasionally spitting out a snack meant for someone else. James tried to categorize the great oppositions of human thought: rational versus empirical, monistic versus pluralistic, deterministic versus free-willed, optimistic versus pessimistic. And Jung, who had a talent for smiling politely before rewriting an entire field, took one look at James's scheme and basically said, "Cute attempt." But human psychology isn't a philosophy lecture, it's a survival mechanism. Jung respected James deeply, but he saw that these oppositions weren't just intellectual positions, they were expressions of type, of unconscious preference masquerading as ideology. Which is why your opinions, yes, even the ones you think are logical or research-based, are often nothing more than your personality wearing a lab coat. Look at today's news cycle. Every headline is a battleground of these same polarities: data versus narrative, freedom versus security, stability versus innovation, the debate over inflation policy, pure sensation versus intuition warfare. Investors want hard numbers, policymakers want long-term vision. The housing crisis, thinking versus feeling on steroids. Should you protect markets or protect people? Even arguments about AI regulation boil down to pessimistic versus optimistic worldviews disguised as practical concerns. This is why reading the news feels less like being informed and more like watching thousands of psychological types publicly work out their childhood wounds. Jung takes James's oppositions and dives deeper. He sees them not as mere categories, but as psychic gravitational forces pulling every mind toward one pole or another. The intuitive drifts toward possibility, the sensor toward proof. The rational mind needs order. The irrational mind thrives on emergence. These aren't arbitrary preferences, they're the architecture of consciousness. James thought these opposites defined philosophical positions. Jung realized they defined people. If you want to know which polarity rules you, don't look at what you say you believe. Look at how you react when you're stressed. That's when your dominant type shoves every other function into a broom closet and grabs the steering wheel with both hands. When markets crash, intuitive types talk about future opportunity, while sensation types start hoarding canned goods. When relationships strain, feeling types launch into emotional diplomacy, while thinking types quietly evaluate the cost-benefit of staying. This isn't morality, it's wiring. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You think you're choosing your worldview. In reality, your worldview is choosing you. And James's whole system falls apart precisely because he treated these oppositions as conscious philosophical commitments where most of them come from the unconscious. The part of you that doesn't care about your identity aesthetic, your politics, or your curated personality brand. Jung goes even further, arguing that philosophical conflict, entire schools of thought, are essentially psychological types debating themselves on a global stage. Rationalists versus empiricists, thinking versus sensation, mystics versus pragmatists, intuition versus thinking, idealists versus realists, feeling versus sensation. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Modern politics looks like a personality disorder with a marketing budget. Here's the part people hate most. Your opposite polarity isn't your enemy, it's your missing half. Every human being walks around with one of these oppositions inflated like a parade balloon while their other limps behind on crutches. The goal isn't to pick a side and die on it. The goal is to integrate the other pole so you stop living as a caricature of yourself. But integrating your opposite, that's pain, that's ego death. People would rather argue endlessly on the internet than confront the fact that their least favorite worldview might actually be their psychological blind spot. And that's the tragedy buried inside James's framework and the brilliance of Jung's expansion of it. The moment you understand these oppositions as forces within you rather than people outside you, the game changes. The enemy dissolves, the projection shrinks, the polarity becomes a compass, not a prison. The real conflict was never between the philosophies. It was between the selves. Key idea. You are built from opposing psychological forces, and your dominant polarity shapes not only how you think, but what you believe is true. Key takeaway. The worldview you defend most fiercely might not be a rational conclusion. It might be your personality protecting its comfort zone. Growth comes from integrating the opposite you've spent your life avoiding. Favorite quote, there are as many opinions as there are temperaments. The stories lives tell. You ever watch someone's life fall apart in slow motion and realize, not with sympathy, but with that unsettling punch of recognition, that what you're witnessing isn't bad luck, but a psychological type acting out its own script? That's the uncomfortable truth hiding in the study of lives. People don't just have personalities, they perform them. And that performance gets more intense the longer life drags them across the stage. In the section of the book dealing with human biography, the author dissects that uncomfortable truth by comparing two archetypal trajectories: the life that expands outward, sprawling across achievements, conquests, innovations, and the life that implodes inward, condensing into a private universe nobody else fully understands. The classical versus romantic distinction shows up again here, not as poetic categories, but as hardwired tendencies. The person who engages the world and the person who withdraws from it. The book uses real historical figures to show how a personality type doesn't merely color someone's decisions. It directs the rhythm of their entire existence, like an invisible metronome buried somewhere behind their ribs. The idea is brutally simple. Some people spend their lives grabbing the world by the throat, others spend it spiraling into private meaning, and everyone else lies to themselves about which one they are. The author doesn't say it that bluntly, but the pattern is impossible to miss. Look at how consistent these biographical types are. Visionaries who burn themselves down because they can't stop accelerating. Thinkers who retreat into their minds so deeply they forget to eat. Emotional personalities who drag whole families into the orbit of their storms. And pragmatic doers who wake up at 60 realizing they spent decades executing tasks that mattered to everyone except themselves. And if you think this is ancient history stuff, take a look at what's happening across America right now. We've got an entire generation trying to reinvent themselves every 18 months because the economy is twitching like a dying insect. Housing costs that break records every quarter. A job market where people rebrand their LinkedIn profiles like they're auditioning for a personality they don't actually possess. And under all that chaos, the same psychological types Jung mapped are quietly steering the ship. The extroverted achievers are grinding themselves into dust, trying to stay relevant, while introverted types are disappearing into rabbit holes of niche expertise because the outer world feels increasingly unhinged. Romantic types are drowning in symbolism. Astrology booms when economies stress, and guess what's booming? And classical types are clinging to facts, data, and rationality with the kind of nervous desperation you only see in people who don't want to admit the ground is moving under them. The book's biography section lays out one of the most provocative claims Jung ever implied. You can predict the shape of a person's future by watching which psychological function they lean on when cornered. That's the part modern personality test talk conveniently ignores. Not how you behave on a sunny day when the rent is paid, how you behave when the world tilts. Some individuals snap outward, loud, aggressive, reactive. Others collapse inward, quiet, withdrawn, obsessively analyzing. Some suddenly rely on intuition, spinning fantasies or apocalyptic predictions. Others cling rigidly to sensation and routine, as if repeating last year's habits will stop next year's problems. Biographies are psychological x-rays, not romantic stories, not inspirational fuel. They're documentation of how a type survives life, or doesn't. That's why Jung studied lives the way an engineer studies bridge collapses. You learn the truth from the failures, not the successes. The book shows this clearly when it contrasts lives that stay coherent versus lives that fracture under the weight of their own imbalances. When someone's dominant function grows too large, too tyrannical, it doesn't gift them mastery, it blinds them. Extroverted achievers become addicted to noise and applause. Introverted thinkers retreat into theories so airtight they suffocate themselves. Feeling dominant personalities over-index on relationships until every conflict becomes a catastrophe. Sensation-dominant individuals cling to the physical world like it's the only real one, which makes metaphor, future planning, and emotional nuance feel like foreign languages. Here's the shocking part. Biography doesn't just reveal type, it exaggerates it over time. That's why people get more themselves with age. Romantic types get more mystical. Classical types get more rigid. Extroverts get louder. Introverts get harder to reach. Life doesn't round you out. It chisels you deeper into whatever shape you already were. That's the part of this book people really need right now. Because America is living through a moment where everyone is being squeezed by forces bigger than themselves. Housing inflation, wage stagnation, political circus performances, and stress always exposes type. Always. Some people are responding by taking on 5 side hustles. Some are researching homesteading blogs. Some are doom scrolling. Some are meditating on a yoga mat that cost them $120 they didn't have, but beneath the coping strategies lies the same psychological blueprint described in the book's biography section. Your type is showing, whether you like it or not, and if you want a real-world example of how personality type shapes a life, look at the recent trend in burnout documentaries and investigative pieces. Journalists keep uncovering the same pattern. People who believed their personality was their superpower, the hustler, the empath, the analyzer, hit adulthood running full speed in one direction until eventually that strength turned into a trap. The biography section warns about exactly that. When one function dominates, it becomes self-destructive. When one worldview replaces all others, it becomes delusion. So the next time you admire someone's life story, don't copy their habits. Don't worship their grind. Ask one question. What psychological type was living that life? Because if your type is different, copying them won't inspire you. It'll break you. Key idea. A person's life story is the long-term handwriting of their psychological type, magnified by time, distorted by stress, and revealed most clearly in the choices they repeat, not the accomplishments they advertise. Key takeaway. You can't outrun your type, but you can become conscious of it. And once you do, you stop copying other people's blueprints and finally start building a life that doesn't collapse under the weight of who you really are. The blueprint of personality. You'd think people would be desperate to understand themselves, but honestly, most of you treat your personality like you treat your phone's settings menu. You never open it, you don't know what half of it does, and you pray it doesn't explode when you're under stress. But here's the wake-up call you didn't ask for, but desperately need. Jung wasn't trying to give you a cute label like INFJ Coffee Gremlin or ENTP Chaos Goblin. He was laying out the psychological equivalent of your internal wiring diagram, and most of you are walking around with exposed wires, blaming everyone else for the electrical fires. What Jung does here, in this long stretch of dense theory, is explain why people don't just behave differently, they perceive reality differently. Let that sink in. You're not arguing with people who don't get it. You're arguing with people who don't even see the same world you see. You're fighting ghosts in someone else's house. This section of the book breaks down the 2 main orientations, extroversion and introversion, and Jung finally stops being poetic and gets brutally structural. Extroversion, in his formulation, means your psychological energy flows outward. You track objects, events, people, cues in the environment, trying to attach yourself to what seems real and valuable. Introversion, by contrast, is energy flowing inward, the subject, your internal viewpoint, becomes the anchor, and the outer world is something you negotiate with, not something you dive into face first like an extrovert ordering bottomless margaritas at 3 p.m. But here's the part everyone tends to screw up. Neither orientation is a personality style. They are survival strategies. They are ancient adaptations shaped by the exact same forces that decided whether your ancestors ran toward the mysterious noise in the bushes or stayed home and let the reckless ones get eaten. Today, the noise in the bushes might be economic volatility, inflation spikes, layoffs, tech disruptions, but the instinctive response is the same. Some people chase the opportunity, others fortify the walls. And because the modern world is built like a psychological casino, constant stimulation, instant feedback, algorithmic manipulation, extroverts are rewarded while introverts mutate into hyper-filtered monks of digital silence. Meanwhile, both groups think the other is insane. From here, Jung dives straight into the functions, the real machinery. Thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, 4 ways the mind orients itself. And once again, society has turned these into mbti personality stickers, when in reality they're the psychological equivalents of operating system processes. Thinking evaluates through logic. Feeling evaluates through value judgment and relational weight. Sensation deals with what is actually present, tangible, sensory. Intuition deals with what is possible, hidden, symbolic, or emerging. You need all 4, but one becomes the tyrant, one becomes the sidekick, and 1 or 2 get shoved into your mental basement and bang on the door when you're stressed. This dominant system, the principal function and the auxiliary, is the most important part of the whole structure. If your dominant function is extroverted, your auxiliary is introverted, and vice versa. Jung didn't design this for fun. It's a psychological balancing act. Your psyche will collapse if all your energy pours in one direction. And let's be real, a lot of modern burnout comes from exactly that imbalance. People living entirely in the world of external demands, extroverted attitude plus extroverted function become hollow drones. People trapped entirely in inner imagery, introverted attitude plus introverted intuition often disconnect from reality until life slaps them across the face. Jung saw this dynamic in 1921, long before social media weaponized it. The most illuminating part is how he describes the typical patterns of each attitude-function combination. Extroverted thinking types build systems, rules, and processes, and then act shocked when people don't comply with them. Introverted feeling types live in an emotional cathedral nobody else can enter, but still expect people to behave according to its sacred symbols. Extroverted sensation types chase the present moment like it's a golden retriever on caffeine. Introverted intuition types stare into the abyss until the abyss hands them a TED Talk. These aren't stereotypes, they're archetypal patterns. And once you understand them, half the people in your life suddenly stop being difficult and start making tragic, hilarious, predictable sense. What this whole section ultimately reveals is that most psychological conflict isn't moral, intellectual, or personal. It's mechanical. You're not broken. Your wiring is just incompatible with the task you keep forcing yourself to do. It's like trying to run Adobe Premiere on a toaster. And yet, instead of learning your inner operating system, you gaslight yourself into thinking discipline will fix everything. Jung's message is simple. Your mind has a structure. Work with it or suffer. Key idea. Your personality isn't who you are. It's how your mind processes reality, and every conflict you face is shaped by the interaction of your orientation, introversion, extroversion, and your dominant auxiliary functions. Key takeaway: until you understand your psychological wiring, you'll keep fighting battles you were never designed to win, and blaming yourself for outcomes you never had the tools to avoid. Favorite quote: every psychological type is judged by its weakest function. Closing the circle. If there's one thing people hate more than being wrong, it's having to redefine what they thought they already understood. Ask anyone on social media who's been corrected in a comment section. They will burn the whole platform down before admitting they clicked share on a fake headline. And Jung saw this exact same stubbornness in the psyche. Most people would rather cling to a half-baked identity than face the uncomfortable truth that their self is made of invisible moving parts they didn't design, don't control, and definitely don't understand. That's why, by the end of Psychological Types, Jung slams on the brakes and says, "Alright, before we go any further, let's define what the hell we're even talking about." Because after hundreds of pages unraveling intuition, sensation, thinking, feeling, introversion, extroversion, symbols, philosophy, poetry, psychopathology, history, and the entire mess of human subjectivity, he knows most people are still out here mixing up intuition with vibes like they're reading a horoscope on their lunch break. So he gives clear definitions, not to confine the psyche, but to stop people from abusing psychological language the way the internet abuses the word narcissist. And what's brilliant is that his definitions don't shrink the psyche, they expand it. Every term becomes a doorway instead of a label. Thinking isn't being smart, it's the process of evaluating truth claims. Feeling isn't being emotional, it's assigning value. Sensation isn't being basic, it's direct contact with reality. Intuition isn't psychic powers, it's the mind's way of leaping into the future by detecting hidden possibilities. And you'd think people would love this clarity, right? No, because clarity exposes delusion, and delusion is comfortable. Jung spent half his career trying to convince people that personality typology wasn't a spiritual zodiac. Meanwhile, modern pop psychology keeps trying to drag his definitions back into astrology territory because nuance doesn't go viral. Then the epilogue hits, and Jung makes something painfully obvious. Psychological types are not a personality prison. They're not excuses. They're not badges. They're tendencies, patterns, gravitational pulls in the psyche. And the healthier someone becomes, the less rigid these tendencies get. Put that in modern terms. If you still walk around bragging about your type like it's a Hogwarts house, Jung is politely telling you to grow up. His real message is unity, not sameness, unity. Your conscious and unconscious have to form some kind of working relationship, or you'll end up living in a civil war with yourself. And this isn't spiritual fluff. Neuroscience actually backs this up. Too much limbic dominance? You make impulsive, chaotic decisions. Too much prefrontal control? You become rigid, anxious, and disconnected from your instincts. Jung saw this dynamic 100 years before the fMRI, and then we get to the appendix, 4 papers written between 1913 and 1936 that show Jung refining, arguing, evolving, and sometimes wrestling with his own ideas. It's like watching a scientist dismantle his own prototypes, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't complete. In these papers, he double-checks the connections between typology and myth, typology and neuroscience. Long before neuroscience existed, typology and psychopathology, typology and religion. What he's doing is showing you, these ideas are not pop. They are structural, they are foundational, they are the blueprint beneath the blueprint. And maybe the most confrontational thing about Jung's final writings is this. He rejects the modern fantasy that people can be fixed by quick answers. He warns that typology is dangerous in the wrong hands, especially the hands of people who want shortcuts, diagnoses, or excuses. According to Jung, the only real danger isn't being a certain type, it's refusing to know you have one. This hits even harder today. In an era where every economic headline screams recession fear, inflation anxiety, and quiet quitting, people are desperate for identity systems that tell them who they are. But if Jung were alive today, he'd tell half the internet to stop treating their personality like a TikTok bio and start confronting the reality that they're a walking contradiction of conscious claims and unconscious motives. And he'd tell the other half that knowing your type doesn't mean you're enlightened. It just means you've read the manual. The circle closes when you realize the definitions aren't the end of the book. They're the beginning of actually using any of this. If the earlier chapters gave you a map of your mind, the final writings give you the language to read it without lying to yourself. And once you stop lying to yourself, you stop breaking under your own shadow. That's the entire point. To know enough about your internal architecture that you stop becoming a victim of your own psychology. Key idea: your psyche has a structure, and the only thing standing between you and self-mastery is your willingness to understand it instead of hiding behind labels. Key takeaway: Jung's final message isn't know your type, it's stop letting your unconscious run your life. When you understand the definitions, the epilogue, and the deeper context of typology, you stop treating personality as destiny and start treating it as a tool. Anyone can know their type. Only the brave learn what to do with it. Favorite quote: the concept is not the essence of the thing, but only a token by which the thing is known. Conclusion. So here we are. After dragging you through ancient philosophers, medieval theologians, Schiller's existential fistfights, mythic symbols, psychopathology, aesthetics, William James's intellectual boxing matches, the life histories that expose us, and finally the machinery of your own mind, we've arrived at the only place this journey could ever end, holding up a mirror you can't wiggle away from, because that's what this entire book has been. One enormous, relentless confrontation with the truth you keep trying to dodge, the truth you conveniently forget when your ego wants to stay comfortable. Your psyche has been running the show the whole time, whether you signed off on it or not. Every chapter hammered that same message in a different language. The first tore open the hidden backstage of your mind, showing you that the unconscious isn't some dusty corner of your brain. It's the director calling the shots. Then we walked through ancient battles and medieval debates. Why? Because humans have been wrestling with psychological types long before anyone had a clipboard or an mbti chart. Schiller showed you the war between instinct and ideal, the two forces that decide whether you live consciously or slide through life like a passenger in your own skull. The Apollonian and Dionysian forces revealed that your personality is not a stable structure. It's a battlefield where order and chaos never stop arguing. Human character under pressure ripped away the mask, revealing that the you advertise online collapses the moment life stops being convenient. Myth and symbol reminded you that the stories you love are not entertainment. They're codes your unconscious uses to talk to you because you refuse to listen any other way. Psychopathology showed you what happens when the psyche gets fed up with your denial and takes the wheel by force. Aesthetics reveal the parts of yourself you bury under taste, preference, and personal style, because art doesn't lie, even when you do. Modern philosophy exposed your hidden biases, the inner polarities that make you think you're being rational when you're actually just being predictable. Biography confronted you with the uncomfortable truth that your life story is the most honest psychological document you'll ever produce. And the grand finale, the blueprint of personality, made something brutally obvious. There are functional systems inside you that don't care about your feelings, your excuses, or your self-narratives. They operate whether you mature or not. And now you've reached the end where Jung drops the final hammer. To know your type is nothing. To transform because of it is everything. That's the part modern psychology keeps skipping. That's the part personality influencers avoid. That's the part people run from because it's easier to identify as an INFJ than to confront the unconscious machinery you've been denying your whole life. This book was never about personality. It was about responsibility. Responsibility for your shadow. Responsibility for your impulses. Responsibility for the unconscious forces shaping your choices. Responsibility for becoming someone who isn't just a bundle of reactions wearing a face. Every chapter ripped away another excuse. Every idea shoved you closer to the realization that you're not done, because the psyche is never done. And if you got this far waiting for some motivational send-off to soothe you, keep waiting. Growth isn't soothing. It's violent. It breaks identities. It crushes illusions. It demands the version of you that hides behind laziness, denial, and comfort finally step aside. If something in these chapters burned, good. That means something inside you is waking up. And if something inside you feels challenged, irritated, or attacked, even better. That means your ego heard the message. And if you reach the end thinking, damn, I barely understand myself, congratulations. That's the most psychologically mature thought you've had in years, because the moment you stop pretending you already know who you are, you finally become someone capable of learning. And if you want the full depth, not the YouTube version, not my commentary, not the chopped down structure I stitched together for you, but the real weight of Jung's mind, buy the book. Seriously. Get the physical copy, mark it up, fight with it, let it bother you, let it teach you the language your unconscious has been speaking since the day you were born. This entire video, this entire breakdown, this whole psychological demolition, it was just the key. The door is still in front of you. Now you get to decide whether you open it or keep living inside a mind you never bothered to understand. Your move.